had searched me, and the guy actually said, at first he said I robbed him and I didn't have anything on me. And that's
you
when
say nothing, you mean no weapon and none of his property?
No weapon, no money, anything he said that I allegedly robbed him for. So the guy actually changed up his story and said that I actually tried to rob him, and then another police officer came and they said that I robbed him 2 weeks prior, and then they said we're going to take you to the precinct and most likely we're going to let you go home, and then I never went home.
And it was terrific that we got to hear Kalief's voice describing what happened. But just to recap a bit, May 2010, he's coming home from a party late one night in the Bronx, walking with his friend down the street, and a police car pulls up. There's somebody in the back seat who points him out, saying, you know, accusing him of a robbery that had happened 1 or 2 weeks earlier. He says, I didn't do it.
First he actually says, I didn't steal anything tonight. Right. Look at my pockets. Right. And then they went back and checked with the guy, and they said, oh, this happened a couple weeks ago. Right.
So from the beginning, it sounded like, at least in the way Kalief tells it, some confusion about the dates, which is significant. And he goes into the precinct thinking, and he's in the holding cell, thinking, I'm just going to be here for a couple hours. We'll clear up this misunderstanding. And as you said, he ended up doing almost 3 years on Rikers Island for many reasons. But the system sort of completely failed him in every possible way. There was no speedy trial, and during that time he was locked up in the adolescent jail on Rikers Island. Explain Rikers. Sure. You know, when we talk about Rikers Island, it's a jail complex. There's 10 different jails there, and I think a lot of people get confused between prison and jail. A prison is where you go after you've been convicted and sentenced. A jail is where you go while you're waiting for your case to go through the court. On Rikers Island, 85% of the people locked up there are legally innocent. They have not been convicted of a crime yet. And they may never be convicted of a crime. They're there waiting to find out whether they're guilty or innocent and what their fate is going to be. And so Kalief was one of those people. So despite the fact that he was not convicted of a crime, he endured the punishment anyway.
But he ended up basically in Rikers because he couldn't make bail, right? Because it was a relatively minor charge. The judge ended up giving him bail time, but releasing his co-defendant as well. Could you explain why that happened?
Sure. So from the beginning of the case, there were 2 co-defendants, and Kalief's co-defendant, the other friend, was released from day 1, and so he got to wait at home while the case went through the system. And Kalief's bail was set at $3,000 because he was already on probation in a prior case. So he had a mark against him, and that mark sort of chased him for the next 3 years. Ultimately, they filed a violation of probation against him, which meant that he was remanded. So even though the bail was $3,000, it was out of the reach of his family. Even if they had spent time fundraising from everybody they knew, ultimately it didn't matter because he was remanded. There was no bail set for 3 years. So he was held without bail while this case sort of crawled through the court system.
Well, and just to clarify, on that prior conviction, that was a youthful offender adjudication. So that theoretically was sealed from his record. So while he was convicted, he was 16 at the time, and that conviction was sealed from his record. Not something that should have been used against him, but perhaps an anomaly because he was on probation at the same time. In any event, as Jen pointed out, I would have titled her piece, and it was an excellent piece. Obviously, I spoke with her in depth while she was writing the article. I would have titled it "The Criminal Justice System Deconstructed." And I can go through all of those aspects with you, but I know that...
I wanted to ask you particularly about this whole issue of people being held in jail, in essence, to pressure them to plead out. Because we often see the criminal justice system on television as these trials, these dramatic trials. But I've always felt that the essence of the criminal justice system in America, 95% of the cases, are the plea bargains. People being pressured not to go to trial, but to plead guilty. And if you could talk about how that's used time in and over and over again to get defendants to plead out.
Well, I don't know if it's a tactic per se. I don't know if it's something intentional per se that the district attorney's office, a technique that the district attorney's office uses to...
And you were a prosecutor, so you probably did it all the time.
I'm familiar with all of these things, Amy. I know how it goes, for sure. But I think it's understood that if someone's... It's just common sense. If someone's in jail and they're desperate to get out, they're more inclined to take a plea. It's just human nature to do anything to find any way to get out of that jail, especially if you've spent some time in solitary.
That's what is so amazing about Kalief. When the Bronx judge is replaced by a Brooklyn judge, and she begins to see what he's been through and says, you will be out today after 2.5 years, just plead. You face 15 years in jail if you go to trial. And he said no. I mean, all the other prisoners said, are you crazy, to him? This is a kid. He said, I'm innocent. I'm not going to say I was guilty.
I mean, it's incredible. Obviously, the longer you're incarcerated in jail, the greater the pressure to plead, right? And for somebody like Kalief, who was in one of the worst jails, he was in the adolescent jail in Rikers Island, which the U.S. Attorney's office recently put out a blistering report about the horrific conditions there. On top of that, he spent most of his time in solitary confinement. So it just ratchets up the pressure more and more and more. You know, he could not have been under greater pressure to plead, and yet, despite all that, he just said, to that day to the judge, you know, made that offer, and he said, I'm all right. I didn't do it. I'm all right. And the judge says, you're all right? I mean, clearly he was not all right, but he said, I'm all right. Like, I got this. I could do it. And she said, you're all right? And he said, I want to go to trial. The same thing he had been saying for 3 years. But trials rarely happen in the Bronx. And that's sort of one of the sort of dirty secrets of the whole system.
To me, one of the most stunning parts of your article is when you list from the court files all the continuances that occurred in this trial. While he's waiting, demanding to go to trial, you have from the court file, June 23rd, 2011, people not ready, request 1 week. But that 1 week turns into, looks like 3 months, August 24th, 2011. People not ready, request 1 day. Then November 4th, 2011, people not ready, prosecutor on trial, request 2 weeks. Then December 2nd, 2011, prosecutor on trial, request January 3rd. So each time it was the prosecutors who were delaying the start of a trial.
That's true. And then it would, once they asked for a week or 2 weeks, it would turn into a matter of scheduling. Everybody looks at their calendars, and maybe the prosecutor can't do it, or maybe the judge can't do it, or maybe the defense attorney can't. And it became a sort of logistics game at every court date. But, you know, 1 or 2 weeks turning into 6 weeks, you know, for somebody like Kalief, that's 6 more weeks that he's got to wait.
And what about the role of the prior attorney? Because you weren't there from the beginning, Paul Prestio. His initial,
I'll make that clear.
Right, his initial attorney, and you also tried to find out what that initial attorney, who was appointed by the court, did or did not do. Right.
He was a court-appointed lawyer. It's called 18B lawyer in New York City, but a court-appointed lawyer paid $75 an hour to represent Kalief. And, you know, it's a system that has, you know, been criticized over the years because in order to make a living, you got to have a lot of cases. And you're sort of, those lawyers are sort of running around the city all the time. And, you know, so he never visited his client on Rikers Island.
Visited his, that means he never visited his client because he was on Rikers Island the whole time.
That's correct. And, you know, as sad as it is, it's not that uncommon for 18B lawyers never to make the trip to Rikers Island because it's like a half a day, you know, nightmare. You know, they have video conferences in the Bronx where you can talk to your client, you know, face to face. And, you know, I asked him, had he ever done that? He said, I'm pretty sure I did. And then I asked Kalief, did he remember having a video conference with his lawyer? And he said no. So, you know, I don't know. Paul could probably speak better to this.
What about a speedy trial? I mean, there might be a lot of people watching this around the country and around the world now saying, wasn't a law broken here that this kid, from when he was 16 years old, was in prison, 2 of those years in solitary?
I know, you can't even wrap your brain around it. It's so crazy, the whole story. So in New York, you know, so the 6th Amendment, you know, guarantees the right, you know, to a speedy trial. And in New York, we have something called the ready rule. So when these prosecutors, as Juan was reading off the lists, say, you know, we're not ready, but we can be ready in a week. So that's 1 week charged against them. Yet the next court date is set 1 month, 2 months, 3 months away. So that only counts as 1 week against the 6-month deadline that we have in New York. So even though he was held for 3 years, it's not like there's the 3 years count against him. It's every week or 2 weeks or 1 day that the prosecutors ask for. So time is moving in 2 separate ways. There's the sort of the world of the courthouse where time is moving at a glacial pace, and then there's Kalief's life where every day feels like 10 because he's trapped in a box in Rikers Island.
It's a figurative clock that stops and starts throughout the case. But agreed with Jennifer's legal analysis, the adjournments were appalling and should have been challenged at some point, in my opinion, by the attorney, and should not have been allowed to persist by the judges who oversaw the case.
Let's bring Kalief's voice back into this conversation. Kalief Browder told HuffPost Live's Mark Lamont Hill that while he was in solitary confinement at Rikers, the guards often refused to give him his meals.
If you say anything that could tick them off in any type of way, some of them, which is a lot of them, what they do is they starve you, they won't feed you, and it's already hard in there because if you get the 3 trays that you get every day, you're still hungry because I guess that's part of the punishment. So if they starve you 1 tray, that could really make an impact on you. And
how much were you starved?
I was starved a lot. I can't even count.
Kalief Browder went on to say he was once starved 4 times in a row, no breakfast, lunch, dinner, or breakfast again. Talk about the conditions of solitary confinement and how a kid, a teenager, would end up in solitary confinement for 2 years.
Sure. I mean, what Kalief's talking about being hungry in jail, and even though he's talking about one instance, in fact, it was a much sort of broader problem. So when you're in solitary confinement, you get 3 meals a day coming through a slot in the door because you're not leaving your cell. And for teenagers locked in solitary, and this is not just Kalief, this is other teenagers have talked about this, there's not enough food. And once you're in solitary, you know, when you're in general population, the regular jail, if you're not getting enough food, you can maybe get some money in your commissary account and get some snacks and fill up your stomach.
And his mom did put money in commissary.
His mother did look out for him and visited him every week. So here he is stuck in solitary. He can't supplement his meal. He's reduced to begging officers through the cell door, can I get an extra piece of bread? Sometimes they give it, sometimes they laugh at him. And, you know, you basically, there's 12-hour stretch from dinner to breakfast where all these teenagers are drinking water out of the sink to fill their stomachs. And, you know, when he told me this at first, I thought, well, maybe it's just him, or maybe it's a one-off thing, or, you know, he was talking about meals being skipped, but I'm saying it's a broader sort of problem. But there was a recent report that came out from Bronx Defenders organization where they talked about many of their clients with similar complaints. And, you know, for a moment I thought, did we just, you know, just pick up this kid off the street in the Bronx and drop him in Guantanamo? I mean, this is the kind of thing that, you know, that you guys cover all the time. It seemed, frankly, almost unbelievable.
What about the whole issue of his education? I mean, he was a 16-year-old sophomore. What kind of educational support does Rikers give the 16 and 17-year-olds that it jails?
You know, the adolescents in the regular jail were supposed to be taken every day to class, to a school that they have there, and they're taught by Department of Education. You know, Department of Education runs school. But once a kid was put into solitary, they weren't being taken out for school anymore. And what they would do is slip a worksheet under the door in the morning, an officer would, or a few, and you're, finish this by Wednesday, finish this by Thursday. So Kalief's sitting there, he's got nothing to do. He thinks, well, I might as well do something. I might as well try to do this, you know. So he's kind of trying to teaching himself how to be a better writer, math, etc. And then Thursday comes, you know, time moving at this incredibly slow pace, and nobody comes to pick up the work. I mean, that didn't always happen, but it happened often enough. And I mean, it's just, you know, it's a small detail, but it just shows the utter apathy, you know, and lack of concern for everybody in there. So he's banging on the door. Where's the correction officer to pick up the work? You know, he's trying to, you know, improve himself in this, you know, absolutely nightmare of a place.
I don't even think apathy is the word. It's just a reckless disregard for any of those kids who sat in solitary. It's sad, really.